Hi, I'm Kathy Moore, and this is Steps in a Journey. We're talking about this is a class on the spiritual life as we grow together for the eternal life. I'm going to start off with a story of a miracle. This story was brought to my mind because we're talking about memory from Augustine. And the Lord keeps in our mind the things He has done. And I'd forgotten about it, but we recently had a sharing of the ministry with one another. And one of the members brought up this story of the miracle, and it reminded me, brought to my mind the things God has done. And this, it didn't film very well. I'm going to put on YouTube the stories that the people told, but this one wasn't filmed very well, so I won't be putting this one on. So I wanted to start off this talk with this story of this miracle. Sister Mary Matthew, myself, and Marlene Raymond went skiing together. And Marlene mentioned that Sister hardly didn't have to pay anything to go skiing because she had reached the age that they no longer had to pay. Well, we skied a few times up the Baby Hill off of Stevens Pass, and then Marlene and I went down to the lift and no sister. We waited and waited, and finally someone skied up to us and said, "Are you waiting for your friend?" And we said, "Yes, we are." And she pointed up the hill and she says, "There she is. She took a fall. And she's up now, and she said to tell you that she will be coming down to join you soon." And so she did, and she remarked, she says, "Something's wrong with my legs because I can't pick up my skis." But we went up one more time, and we came down again, and again we stopped several times coming down, and Sister said, "Something is wrong. I cannot pick up my feet to make my turns. I don't know what's wrong. It almost feels like my skis are held down to the ground. I can't pick them up." And so when we reached the lift, she says, I'm gonna quit now." She says, "I can't pick up my feet to ski." And so we said, "Okay, we'll quit now." And so we skied over to the picnic tables, and where Sister sat down, and Marlene and I went on into the building to the lockers to get our street boots. And we came back, and there was Sister sitting at the picnic table with her boots. And they were shattered. Not just broken off in which this normal sections break apart, but every section of the boot was shattered into pieces. And this had happened the moment she picked up her foot to take them off. They just shattered in her hands. If she had been able to pick up her feet coming down the slope, moving, and they had shattered, her feet would have been sliced to ribbons. And she says, "An angel held down my boots so that I couldn't pick them up." And so that was quite a miracle that we witnessed of the angels keeping her boots from shattering on the mountain. And so we're going to go to Augustine, and he talks about our memory, which This I don't know about you who are listening. Maybe you're listening to this Zoom broadcast or coming into YouTube and listening to this talk. But I think Augustine is fascinating to read. It's just a different, normal conversation. We've all discussed this in our own minds, talked about how we remember or how we forget. And he goes on and on and on about it, and things that we didn't think about. I know that, we think of it as a computer in our brain is a computer with little cells in it, and where did we put that thing that we want to remember? What's that man's name? I know it's in one of these cells, and only he, of course, he doesn't compare it to a computer, but he does talk about little compartments, a little that our memory goes into. And so we're on book 10, and we're on chapter 14 of book 10, and we're talking about the memory. The same memory contains the feelings of the mind. Not in the same way that my mind contains them when it feels them, but in quite a different way, according to a power peculiar to memory. For without rejoicing, I remember that I've rejoiced. Without sorrow, I recollect my past sorrow. And what I once feared, I review without fear. Without desire, I call to mind past desire. Sometimes, on the other hand, I remember my past sorrow with joy, and my past joy with sorrow. This is not to be wondered at as regards to the body, for the mind is one thing, the body another. If I therefore remember some past pain of the body with joy, it is not so strange. But this very memory itself is mind. For when we want something remembered, we say, see that you keep this in mind. And when we forget, we say, it did not come to my mind. Or, it slipped my mind. Calling the memory itself the mind. Since this is so, how is it that when I remember my past sorrow with joy, the mind has joy while the memory has sorrow? The mind rejoices over the joyfulness which is in it, while the memory is not sad, while retaining the sadness in it. Does the memory perchance not belong to the mind? Who will say so? The memory then is, as it were, the belly of the mind. And joy and sadness are like sweet and bitter food. When these are committed to the memory, they are, as it were, passed into the belly, where they may be stored but not tasted. It is ridiculous to consider this comparison, but yet they are not totally unlike. But consider this. It is out of my memory that I say there are 4 basic emotions of the mind: desire, joy, fear, and sorrow. Whatever I may discuss about them, by dividing each into its own particular kind, and by defining what it is from my memory that I find what to say and bring it out from there. Yet I'm not disturbed by these emotions when I call them to mind and remember them. Yes, and before I recalled and brought them back, they were there, and so could be brought forth by recollection. Perhaps as meat is brought up out of the stomach by chewing the cud. These things are brought out of the memory by recollection. Why then does a man who is thinking of them not taste in his mouth the sweetness of joy or the bitterness of sorrow? Does the comparison fail in this because it is not alike in all respects? For who would ever willingly speak of it if every time we name grief or fear, we should be compelled to feel sad or fearful? And yet we could not speak of them if we did not find in our memory not only the sounds of their names, according to the images impressed on it by our bodily senses, but also the notions of the things themselves, which we never received by any avenue of the flesh. But the mind itself recognized them through the experience of its own passions, committed them to the memory. Or else the memory itself retained them without having them actually assigned to it by the conscious mind. We remember things that without consciously committing them to memory. We don't think, I'm going to remember this, and then remember it. We remember things without thinking about it. It just goes to our memory. And Augustine continues in chapter 15. But whether this is done by images or not, who can readily say? Thus I name a stone. I name the sun. And the things themselves are not present to my senses, but their images are present to my memory. I name a bodily pain, yet it is not present with me when nothing else aches. Yet, unless its image was present in my memory, I would not know what to say of it, nor how to tell pain from pleasure. I name bodily health. When I am sound in body, the thing itself is present within me. Yet, unless its image were also present in my memory, I could not recall what the sound of this name signified. Nor would the sick, when health was named, recognize what was being spoken of, unless the same image were retained by the power of memory, although the thing itself was absent from the body. I name numbers when I count, and it is not their images, but the numbers themselves that are present in my memory. I name the image of the sun, and that image is present in my memory. For I do not recall the image of its image, but the image itself is present to me when I call it to mind. I name memory, and I recognize what I name. But where do I recognize it but in the memory itself? Is it also present to itself by its image, and not by itself? Chapter 16. When I name forgetfulness and recognize what I name, how could I recognize it if I did not remember it? I do not speak of the sound of the name, but the thing which it signifies. If I had forgotten, I could not recognize what that sound meant. When I remember memory, memory itself is, by means of itself, present with itself. But when I remember forgetfulness, there are present both memory and forgetfulness. Memory by which I remember, but forgetfulness which I remember. But what is forgetfulness but the absence of memory? How then can that be present so that I remember it? which, when it is present, keeps me from remembering. But if we hold in memory what we remember, we could never recognize forgetfulness when we hear it named unless we remembered it. So then forgetfulness is retained by memory. It is present then, so that we do not forget it. This being the case, are we supposed to forget? Are we supposed that forgetfulness, when we remember it, is present to the memory only through its image rather than by itself? Because if it was present by itself, it would not cause us to remember, but to forget. Who can search this out? Who shall remember how it is? How do we remember it when we're forgot? We don't know. And yet we remember it. We remember forgetfulness. It's a puzzle. And Augustine continues, Lord, I truly toil in this, yes, and in myself. I have become a difficult soil, requiring too much sweat of the brow. For I am not now searching out the regions of the heavens, or measuring the distances of the stars, or inquiring about the weight of the earth. It is I myself who remember it. I, the mind. It is not so strange if what I am not should be far from me, but what is nearer to me what is nearer to me than myself? And lo, I do not understand the power of my memory, though I cannot even name myself without it. Yes, we can't say, what's your name? We cannot say our name, Kathy Moore, unless we remember it. It comes out of our memory. And he continues, for what shall I say when it is clear to me that I remember forgetfulness? Shall I say that what I remember is not in my memory? Or shall I say that forgetfulness is in my memory so that I will not forget? Both of these are most absurd. But what third view is there? How can I say that the image of forgetfulness is retained in my memory and not forgetfulness itself when I remember it? How could I say this either, seeing that when the image of anything itself is imprinted on the memory, the thing itself must first be present from which the image may be imprinted? For this is the way I remember. This is the way I remember Carthage. And in this way I remember all the places I've been. This is the way it is with men's faces, whom I have seen, and things reported by the other senses. Thus it is with health or sickness of the body. For when these things were present, my memory received images from them, which remain present with me, so that I can look on them and bring them back to mind when I remember them in their absence. If then this forgetfulness is retained in the memory through its image, not through itself, then plainly it was once present itself, so that its image might be taken. But when it is present, how did it write its image in my memory? Since forgetfulness, by its presence, erases even what it finds already recorded. And yet, whatever way, although it is past conceiving or explaining, I am certain that I remember forgetfulness itself too. by which it blotted out what we remember. Chapter 17. Great is the power of memory, a fearful thing, O my God, a deep and multiplicity. And this is the mind, and this is I am myself. What am I then, O my God? What nature am I? A life various and manifold, exceedingly immense. Behold the innumerable plains and caves and caverns of my memory. They're innumerably full of unnumbered kinds of things, either through images, as in all physical bodies, or by actual presence, as the arts, or by certain notions or impressions, like the emotions of the mind, which are retained by the memory, even when we no longer feel them. Because whatever is in the memory is in the mind. I run over all these. I fly. I dive on this side and that, as far as I can, and there's no end. The power of memory is as great as the power of life in this mortal life of man. What shall I do then, O my God, my true life? I will go even beyond this power of mine, which is called memory. Yes, I will go beyond it so that I can approach you, O loving light. What do you say to me? See, I am mounting up through my mind toward you who dwell above me. Yes, I will pass beyond this power of mine, which is called memory, desiring to reach you where you may be reached, and to cleave to you where that is possible. For even beasts and birds have memory. Otherwise they could not return to their dens and nests, nor do the many other things they do. Nor indeed could they be used in any way except through their memory. I'll pass then beyond memory, too, that I may reach him who has separated me from the four-footed beasts and made me wiser than the fowls of the air. So I'll go beyond memory. But where shall I find you, O truly good and certain sweetness? If I find you without my memory, then I cannot retain you in my memory. And how shall I find you if I do not remember you? Chapter 18. The woman who lost her drachma and searched for it with a light could never have found it unless she remembered it. And when it was found, how would she know it was the same coin if she did not remember it? I remember having looked for and finding many things, and I know by that when I was searching for any of them and was asked, "Is this it? Is this it?" I said no, until the thing I was looking for was offered. But if I had not remembered it, whatever it was, though it had been offered to me, I could not have found it, and because I failed to recognize it. And so it always is when we look for and find any lost thing. Nevertheless, when anything is lost from sight by chance, not from memory, as any visible body might be, still its image is retained within us, and we look for it until it is restored to sight. And when it is found, we recognize by its image within. We do not say that we found what was lost unless we recognize it. And we cannot recognize it unless we remember it. It was lost to the eye, but it was retained in the memory. Chapter 19. When the memory itself loses anything, as happens when we forget something and try to recall it, where do we look for it? But in the memory itself. And there, if one thing happens to be offered instead of another, we reject it until we find what we're looking for.